Well, welcome back again this week. You know, for many years we tried to tell people about the Bush family, and we lost a lot of subscribers to our magazine, and people went away, didn't come back ever again because we had maligned a fine family. Well, you try and tell people what's going on behind the scenes and why H.W. Bush, for instance, said that they wanted to promote a new world order, and again, why he was saying that, and the fact that he was saying it and what he was doing to the United States government as a result of that. But people didn't want to listen. Even today, they probably won't like what I'm going to say out of the Chicago Tribune. And it's a little blurb that says, Bushes were witnesses at same-sex wedding. So H.W. Bush was an official witness at a same-sex wedding, but he's a good, fine Christian man. Don't pay any attention to that kind of thing is the thought process with many, many people. It's really quite sad to see that we put these people in position of leadership that betray the image that they project, at any rate. Here's out of the New York Times for last Thursday, Syria rebels aligning with Al-Qaeda. Those are the people that were going to go in and help in Syria, right? Here's out of the Wall Street Journal, Syrian rebels snub leaders in exile. And it talks about that they're going towards more militancy in regard to what's going on and moving towards Al-Qaeda. And these are the things that are going on. We say that we're going in for one reason, but the reality is another. We say we're going to do this in Libya. We're going to replace a terrible dictatorship there. And then what do we end up with? A more militant Islamic government. We say that we're going into Egypt to produce a more democratic government there. It turns out to be the Egyptian Brotherhood. Now the military's retaken the country back, and it's become more militant than it was before in its draconian government. We say we're going into Syria because of this terrible Assad. And we agree that Assad is not somebody I want to live under, that's for sure. But what's the net result? The net result is even getting worse and worse and worse. Here's something that crossed my vision here just this morning. This is out of the New York Times, and let me read this to you because this is very important. The title of the article says, Qaeda plot leak has undermined U.S. intelligence. Since news reports in early August revealed the United States intercepted messages between al-Zawahiri, who succeeded Osama bin Laden as the head of Al-Qaeda, and Nasser al-Waishi, the head of the Yemen-based Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, discussing an imminent terrorist attack, analysis have detected a sharp drop in the terrorist use of a major communications channel that authorities were monitoring. In other words, our authorities were monitoring these sites, these communications links between the head of Al-Qaeda and one of their subordinates in Yemen. Well, all of a sudden now, they can't seem to monitor this communication. Well, that's because of something that we remembered that we have talked about on this site many, many times. When you have the Russians, now by the way, let me go back and talk about al-Zawahiri, the head of Al-Qaeda. We know, due to the revelations of Alexander Litvinenko, the defector from the KGB who was killed in England through a radioactive substance placed in his tea, he revealed that al-Zawahiri was a Russian asset, a Russian-trained asset who was second in command of Al-Qaeda under Osama bin Laden. Now he is the leader of Al-Qaeda. Now he's a Russian-trained asset, okay? Now what we see is the United States has allowed Spetsnaz troops to come into Fort Carson and train with special forces on the ground using our communications systems, in the war against terrorism. They've allowed Russian generals into the Colorado Springs NORAD headquarters using our communication systems against the war on terrorism. They've allowed, in fact, sign an agreement with FEMA to allow our people and their people to interact and interexchange in crowd control against the war on terrorism, in case maybe some terrorist tries to infiltrate the Olympics coming up in Russia, or perhaps some terrorist wants to infiltrate into the World Cup or the Super Bowl or something of that nature, and so we're going to allow the Russians to see how those communications work and so on and so forth. Now, we are exposing all of our communications technology in the war against terror to the Russians. Now, gee, maybe, perhaps, the Russians passed on this technology and capability of what we can do in monitoring Al-Qaeda. Do you think? Maybe a little bit? At any rate, let's change the subject. China goes hog wild. Or wait a minute, China goes whole hog, I'm sorry. At any rate, the continuing saga of China buying up our food chain in the United States. Now they have plans for doing it in the entire world. This, of course, is about the Shanghai International Holdings buying out the Smithfield Foods in Virginia. The integration of the two companies will be closely watched amid speculation the merger could spark another major food and agriculture deals between the U.S. and China. So this is only the beginning, folks. Executives reiterated Shanghai has no plans now to export pork from China to the United States, in part because it costs considerably more to produce pork in China. Do you believe that for a moment? They say they don't have plans, and I think the key word they leave out is now. The idea that they can produce pork cheaper in the United States because of feeding the pork corn in the United States is ludicrous. They don't always feed pigs corn, particularly in China. They feed them anything. And of course, I keep remembering those images of dead pigs floating down those Chinese rivers because they were diseased. But they have no plans right now to export to the United States. And by the way, they just got caught again in China, a major food processor in China, selling faux beef. It seems as though they've taken a lot of other meats, dyed them red, so you got nice red meat, right? And sold on the market as beef. And it wasn't beef at all. It was a variety of things, pork, chicken, rat, you name it. And it was processed in such a way to make it look like beef. Not to worry. But they say, how much should we worry about poultry imported from China? Now, this is out of the Council on Foreign Relations. I won't read you the whole article. Let me just read you the conclusion as to what the Council on Foreign Relations authors have to say about this whole process. Not to worry, we're not going to have any problems from the Chinese food, but just in case we do, here's a good solution. A wiser and more constructive approach would call for the United States government to work with China to construct a functioning product safety regulatory framework, including establishing an authoritative and competent regulatory authority and building an effective and enforceable rule of law. So we're going to cooperate with the Chinese about the rule of law and inspecting food in China and the United States. They not only want the Chinese to buy out our food chain and control the major aspect of life itself, and that is food and agriculture and everything else, but also allowing a communist government to come in and work with our government in regulating it. And that wouldn't just be the food supply relative to what comes from China, but the farmers themselves. From the moment they grow the grain to feed the animals through the whole process would be controlled by our government and the Chinese government. Frankly, I don't see much difference between the two. Until next week, we'll see you then.